Hello everyone, this is Jessica, and today I'm going to be creating this assemblage piece using some of the supplies from the Mix Me Inspired box in October 2020. So I'm starting out by separating the layers of the napkin that I'm going to use for decoupage, and this is one of the napkins that's included in the box. So I'm just carefully pulling apart the layers until I have the final top printed piece, which I'm going to glue down to this Holtz Etcetera thickboard tag. Now I'm gluing the napkin down with Holtz collage medium. You could also use any kind of gel medium or glue that you traditionally use for decoupage. This is just what I chose to use today. So I'm putting a layer over the entire board, and then I'm going to place my napkin down and smooth it out gently with my fingers, making sure that the napkin is completely flat onto the thick board. Now you will get some wrinkles, but for the most part, I'm just carefully smoothing those out, and then I'm going to be at peace with however it dries. And as it's drying, I'm going to carefully tear around the edges to remove the extra napkin. And I'm going to set aside those scraps of napkin that I can use on another project. So now that my piece is completely dry, I'm going in with some Dina Wakley Media white gesso on my finger, and I'm just rubbing it in certain places on the tag. And this is just to give it more of a shabby chic whitewash look. Now I am also having a baby wipe there, so I'm putting it on and then removing it with the baby wipe so I get more of like a ghost coverage of gesso versus a complete coverage like you see in the top right and bottom left corners. Now I'm going to apply some texture paste through a stencil. So the texture paste I'm using today is from the Holtz Distress line, and this is the traditional matte. So I'm just going to put it through the stencil, and if it goes in some areas where I don't like, I'm just going to use my palette knife to wipe that up, and then continue on by putting some in the upper right corner. So you can see here that I'm overlapping where I put the gesso, and then also allowing some of that texture paste to go beyond the gesso. And you can see as I lift the stencil exactly where that texture paste is gone. Now, as I'm looking at this, I decided that I needed a little bit more in the upper left corner, so I'm going to carefully line up my stencil again with the texture paste that I've already applied, and then add a little bit more. And now I'm going to set this aside to dry completely. And while that texture paste is drying, I'm going to paint some of my elements with black gesso. So the first thing you see is the round piece that comes with the thick board tag. And then these are two elements that I popped out of the Janine Mindful Art gray board. I think this was from collection 1. So I'm just painting this with black gesso, and then I'm going to let that dry before I glue it down onto my tag. So you can see the reinforcer goes around the whole of the tag. And then I'm using, once more, Distress Collage Medium. This is in the small bottle, squeeze bottle. But it's the same adhesive, it's just a different way of using it. It's a little easier in the squeeze bottle to place it on detailed items such as these scrolls. And after I have enough adhesive on the back, I'm going to press these scrolls into place and allow them to dry. So on detailed items, I do find it easier to put little dots of glue and then spread them out with my finger. This prevents the glue from clumping up or getting in areas where I didn't want it to be. So this is my preferred method for applying adhesive. And like I said, I'm just going to put that second scroll down, make sure I like the placement, and then let this dry completely. And now we can begin adding color. So what I'm using here is the Finnabar matte wax in patina green and a Finnabar dabbing brush. And what I'm doing is I've placed some matte wax down in my palette there, and then I'm using the brush and swirling it into the brush and then applying it in a circular motion onto my tag board. So this is the first layer, and as you can see, I don't have complete coverage. If I added more wax, I would, but what I'm trying to do here is create a very layered, grungy, aged look, so I'm going to do this in layers. Next, I'm going in with another color of the Finnabar matte wax, and this is rusty brown, and I'm once again doing that exact same steps of applying it in different areas, overlapping the green in some areas and not in others. And then I'm going to let this dry again. And I'm just going to keep doing this over and over and over, creating up different layers of grunge, exposing some areas and not in others. And it's important to note that the wax has about a 10-minute dry time. So I'm letting it dry about 10 minutes between each layer of wax. So now that I'm happy with the overall coverage I've got with the waxes and the dabbing brush, I'm going to go in by putting the wax directly onto my finger and highlighting different areas. And by doing this, I'm able to get more of a spotty coverage. Because what I'm trying to create here is a piece of vintage decor that's probably been out in the rain and been rained on for the last 7 years. And that's why we're getting this very grungy, it could potentially even be moldy look, as you can see here, especially around the scrolls in the bottom half of this. So like I say, I'm just highlighting different areas with the patina green wax, and I'm going to do the exact same thing with the rusty brown wax and applying that with my finger. And by doing this, we're also able to highlight different areas by the color only getting just on the top versus overall coverage. Now, as you can see around the scroll, I am using the dabbing brush to kind of get it more into the nooks and crannies of those scrolls because they are very detailed. And this is very much so up to your personal eye. So what I mean by that is, whenever you think it looks great, you can stop. I'm continuing on because I really like that layered look, but this is of course up to your own personal preference. So now I'm going to add some cording to the top of the thick board tag, and what I'm doing is I'm putting a little bit of distressed collage medium on the ends of each of the ropes so that they will not fray as I add color and display this in my home for years to come. And by doing that little bit on the end, it just stops anything from moving. Now I'm taking some of the rusty brown wax again, and I'm applying it directly onto the cording. And then I'm going to use the dabbing brush to rub this out. Now, it didn't really move it all that much, but it did soften the areas that I applied it directly to the rope. Rope, cord, whatever you call this, twine. So now I'm taking two colors of the Dina Wakley Media paint, and this is Ancient and Medieval, and I'm mixing them together to get this sort of dark brown, metallic, grungy color. And I'm going to apply that with my finger directly onto the tag board. And I'm not really wanting, once again, to get complete coverage because this is adding to that grungy, aged look that I'm creating. So as I'm applying this, I'm thinking in my head how time has let the metallic sheen wear off, and now it's being covered with this green patina color. So after I was happy with the metallic paint coverage, I'm going to once again go in with my patina green wax and really get it into the grooves around the scroll. And then I'm wiping some of it back off with a baby wipe. Now you can see, especially on the left bottom of the scroll, that it almost pushed it all the way back to the black gesso that we applied in the very first step. The reason for this is that I probably didn't let the wax dry as much as I should have, because when the wax is completely dry, it is permanent and waterproof. So if you don't want to be able to wipe this back quite as much as I am here, as you can see like in the bottom of the right scroll, it's not removing as much. That's because the wax was dried there. So if you don't want to be able to wipe it back completely, let it dry and give it plenty of time, and then that will not happen. So now I'm just going to put that cording that we colorized earlier onto the tag. So now it's time to add some drips and drops to this. So what I'm using is my black gesso, and I'm adding a lot of water to this to get it to a very runny fluid consistency. You could also use your regular fluid acrylics or any kind of gloss spray or anything that dries permanent. I didn't have any of those nearby at hand, so I just used water and gesso. So I'm taking this watered down black gesso and scooping it up with my palette knife and then hitting my hand against the palette knife to create these drips and drops. So the more you have on your palette knife, the bigger your drops are going to be. If you want that very fine mist, you have to have very little on your palette knife and then hit it quite forcefully to get those little drips to fall. So after I've given all of this a chance to dry, I'm going to begin layering on these duck feathers. So I'm going to just layer them over the center, once again gluing down with the Distress Collage medium in the precision bottle. And I'm going to layer 5 of them all the way across. Now, I'm not gluing down the tops of the feathers because I want those to still have free movement and not be completely smushed down onto this board. So I am only applying glue to the bottom. And some of the feathers I'm overlapping, some I'm not. And I'm also taking care, as I made these choices, that I picked feathers that weren't exactly the same color, so as I layered them, you would see the color definition between each feather. Now I'm going to give these feathers, I let this sit for about an hour so that that glue was completely dry. And while I was letting it dry, I took a piece of the gray board from Janine Mindful Art and this little bird, and I'm covering it with a layer of black gesso. And after the gesso has a chance to dry, I'm going to use Dina Wickley Media in Ancient to add some different tones to that bird. I'm also going to take a little bit of that leftover paint and just rub it in areas with my finger, mostly because I just didn't want to waste the paint, so I'm adding a few extra highlights. So now I'm going to glue down this bird that I decorated. And I'm going to layer it to the right side of the feathers, so it's extending a little bit beyond the feather. And the very last thing I'm going to do is use a Tim Holtz sticker quote. And I'm going to cut this quote into 3 pieces so that it layers a little bit nicer onto my tag board. And I'm just going to stick this right onto the bottom portions of the feathers. Live each day with grace and authenticity. And the very last thing I'm going to do, just to kind of give a nice edge to the tag board, is I'm using an archival ink, which is a permanent ink. And this is the Distress color Black Soot. And I'm just going to round the outside of the tag board to darken the edge and give it a nice frame. And you want to make sure that everything is completely dry before you do this step, or otherwise you will damage your ink pad. And now we're done. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you were inspired to create your own tag board. I'd love to see what you're making, so be sure to share with us on social media using hashtag #OurJournalJunction. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any of our future videos. Have a wonderful day.